Hi everyone, welcome to Identi3, a podcast all about Web3 and digital identity. My name is Nick and I'm the CEO of Dock, and it's my pleasure to be joined today by Sebastian Rodriguez and Otto Mora. Welcome to the podcast, guys.
Thank you for having us, Nick.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, so both Sebastian and Otto are from Polygon Labs. Brief bit of intro. I will get the guys to do it in a bit more detail themselves, but Sebastian is the VP of product for Polygon ID, and Otto is part of the same org, working the sales lead for the Americas. But maybe you could do a little bit more of a detailed intro for yourselves, and then also a little bit about what Polygon ID is working on.
Okay. Well, yes, I'm based in Barcelona. I'm leading the Polygon ID team, and I've been doing that over the last year. It's a team with a story. It's based on for the industry, a very old protocol called Ident3, which defines the crypto primitives and all the base layer. And now we are creating a wrapper or a layer on top of the protocol to make it more easy to use, more friendly for developers, right? We work with Dock in that direction to make also the experience easier to developers to use the benefits of the protocol.
Fantastic. A little bit more about yourself as well, Sebastian. I mean, you've been in this space for a little while. I know that because we've spoken before. You're fairly new to the kind of Web3 space, but you've been working with software for a number of years.
Yes. I'm quite new, I would say, to the Web3 world. I think 1 year is still new. But yeah, I've been in software for more than 20 years. So I've seen it in all shapes and forms.
And Otto, what about yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, so I'm Otto Mora. I'm based in San Jose, Costa Rica. I'm the Americas tech sales lead for Polygon ID. And I've been in Web3 for a number of years, been doing consulting before that. I think it's, kind of coming into more the decentralized identity space for me in the recent number of months that I've been. And it's great working with Sebastian and the team, and it's been a great journey so far.
Yeah, and from my side, for those that are not familiar, we don't often do too many intros about Dock here, but we may be getting kind of access to a new audience working with Polygon ID, so probably makes sense for me to do that more for Dock's perspective. So Dock has really created a verifiable credential platform that enables organizations to go on and create profiles and make claims about things that are entirely verifiable. So this is a platform that contains like a number of different tools. And ultimately what it does, it enables to basically reduce data fraud and for organizations to verify information instantly or certainly very quickly, and getting away from the long manual verifications of data that we see across a wide range of industries today. So that's really our focus. And we've come together here. We've been working together kind of on the side in a little bit of a stealth mode for a month or so, maybe a little bit longer. And a big part of why we've come together today is to kind of announce that you guys have an amazing network with Polygon and Polygon ID. Kind of zero knowledge proofs are very much a core part of it. So really kind of focused on providing privacy. And so Dock has enabled with our SaaS-based tooling, enabled developers to be able to issue Polygon ID credentials extremely quickly, potentially within minutes. And the cool thing about what we're bringing here as well is it's not just developers that can use this technology now. Dock also has a no-code solution, which also uses our API. And therefore, non-developers can actually start to issue credentials on Polygon, which is really, really exciting. And it's really just kind of simplified that process entirely from some of the kind of extra steps that may exist for developers not using Dock, for example. And the great thing about this combination is with Polygon's technology, it really does enable the ability to only reveal the information absolutely required for the use case. So a great thing about zero knowledge proofs is, of course, that you only need to reveal, you can prove something without revealing the information itself. And that's something that's extremely powerful that Polygon brings to the table here. And I think that our hopes for this, and be great to get your input on this, and I'll stop waffling, but be great to get your input. But I think that we think that this collaboration will bring this type of technology to a much broader audience. So maybe before it's a little bit specialized, it's harder to use. Of course, as you make things easier to use, easier to work with, it brings more people on board. So that's certainly our aspirations for this collaboration. So very long-winded way to announce that we're excited to be collaborating with Polygon ID and to be enabling people to work with your platform using our API in an extremely fast and efficient way. So that all that said, it would be great if maybe one of you guys could, maybe Sebastian, if you wouldn't mind taking some of our listeners through some of the kind of core concepts of decentralized identity, and how it maybe differs from some of the approaches that we've seen in the past. So we've had centralized identity and we've also had federated. How does this new world of like self-sovereign identity differ from those?
Well, first, I like to start saying that decentralization is a super complex topic, right? Because decentralization can happen at several levels or in several layers, right? You can run a decentralized architecture, but then you can have a completely centralized governance, right? Or the other way around. Components can be decentralized, but then the relationship of power can still be centralizing the ability to censor, right, to forbid some identity. So decentralization is quite difficult. It's difficult to define, and it's also difficult to implement, right? So just to give a short answer to this decentralized identities are unique in the sense that you don't need permission from anyone to create your identity, and nobody can take it from you, right? So this is the idea, and this is why the decentralized identities are usually the answer to the self-sovereign identity. These are two different concepts. Not all self-sovereign identities are based on a full decentralization. The self-sovereign identity aspect is the aspect of I own it, I control it, I manage it. But then very often the best way to achieve that is decentralizing, because when there is centralization, there is the ability to censor, to deface, to do all kind of things, right? Comparing that to federated approaches like signing with Google, Apple, or any of the social networks, right? These solve one aspect of the challenge, which is my identity can be used across multiple domains and applications, but it doesn't solve the aspect of I'm in control of it. This actually is not my identity. This is an account that is not owned by me. It's not in control by me, and I like to challenge all the listeners to think what will happen if they would lose their Gmail or their Apple accounts. What would that mean for their digital identities, right? That is, at this point, this is huge, right? So I like to add that decentralization, when you try to implement it for real and you are committed, and I have to say Polygon ID is super committed to decentralization and privacy. So they have been our leading principles since the very beginning. It's very hard to implement, but also it can introduce some additional responsibilities on the users, on the developers, because with big power comes big responsibility. And just to give a bit of context to what you were saying before, right? In the case of Polygon ID, when it comes to issue credentials, we're providing self-hosted issuer node, which is a server that the organization needs to deploy, maintain. That gives you the full decentralization story. That gives you all the control, right? But as a counterpart of that, you need to deploy a server. You need to maintain it, which makes sense for some developers and some organizations. But in some cases, people just want to get the easy path. They can compromise a bit of this decentralization, and they just want to get the task done, right? And this is where I think the integration with Docs plays really well.
Yeah. And I think the key part that you can take away from decentralized identity is, at the heart of it, is the ability for the individual to control their own identity, or for the organization to control their own identity as well. And to your point as well, Sebastian, I don't think people always appreciate that they think of their Facebook login or Google login as theirs. The reality is, if they decided for whatever reason to not use Google in that country, or for Google themselves, either they made a mistake, because there's been stories in the past with, like, I think even Mark Zuckerberg was locked out of Facebook famously a few years ago. And so if they decide for whatever reason to remove your access, that at that point you truly understand how little control you have. And so I think a big thing about decentralized identity is for the individual to control and totally manage that themselves. So thanks for that explanation. The other part is that we'll get into today, and it feels like a good thing to talk about at this point, just to give some context to our discussion, is looking at verifiable credentials. And maybe you could just explain what verifiable credentials are to our listeners as well, if you wouldn't mind, Sebastian.
I'll give a non-technical explanation, right? Because I think there is plenty of resources out there. If you want to read the specifications and the standards, anyone can see all the complexity of it, right? But I think verifiable credentials are the digital version of credentials that we use in the real world, right? And in this case, as credentials, they solve two main issues, right? The first issue is the interoperability, right? The fact that there is a common language for people that can represent signals of trust or information about an individual, an object, whatever, right? I want to say something about something. I want to make an attestation, right? I want to do that in a way that the rest of the world can understand what I'm saying, right? So we need to find this common ground, this space for interoperability. And I think that is the first big value of verifiable credentials, just the standardization of it. And the second is all the cryptography that has been put on top of verifiable credentials that secures the chain of trust, right? From the source until the party that is verifying that credential, right? In the digital world, a lot of things are easier, right? So transferring information is easier, reaching is easier. A lot of things seems to be magical and easier, but there are things that on the counterpart are super extremely difficult. Like scarcity is difficult, and that's what the rise of NFTs, but also securing the chain of trust and securing that nobody is tampering the information, because the supply chain of information is super complex, right? And keeping the trust through all the chain is something that requires heavy cryptography, and I think that is what verified credentials provide too.
I mean, we're doing everything online these days as well. I think, and having these physical credentials, that we still have the hangover from that, and probably will for many years. But I mean, and it's probably, as you can tell, it's been many years since I've been at university, to more than I'd wish to try and think about. But I mean, I think it's still fairly commonplace that you're given a physical certificate, driver's licenses. I know we're moving to a world of mobile driver's licenses that are digital, but still, we still carry about these laminated cards with us, and obviously that's not really suitable for the modern world. So moving to a digital form of identification, or making claims that can be instantly verified and known to be true, is extremely powerful. But yeah, that was a great explanation. Thank you for that. Otto, I can move over to you a little bit just now, if you don't mind. So verifiable credentials, there are like a myriad of use cases for them. Almost some of the issues with them as a business is trying to figure out which ones to focus on, because there's so many great use cases. What are some of the ones that excite you the most?
Yes, like you said, there's many obvious use cases. Within the Web3 space, I believe that some of the more interesting ones are around adding identity, or like rich identity, to these Web3 platforms, right? So we have DeFi platforms. They're going to need to be compliant with KYC regulations. That's coming in the future. That's going to be necessary, and that's born out of compliance, right? But there's also other credentials that these DeFi protocols are able to issue to their users. They're already building credit scores effectively by using these DeFi platforms, and these can be leveraged in, rich credentials that can attest to your credit score, to your credit worthiness, to your financial history, that can be leveraged, outside of that given DeFi platform. And you can see this interplay between DeFi platforms trusting one another's credentials, right? That can be leveraged and useful. And it's more privacy preserving than having to show your blockchain address with your, transactions, right? And, in any case, users usually use multiple blockchain addresses, right? So that's going to be needed. Also, these online communities that we have in Web3, which are DAOs or decentralized autonomous organizations, they're going to need to be able to, guarantee that their users are humans. This is becoming more and more relevant, right? More forms of complex AI challenge, you know, traditional techniques to verify that a person is a person. So I think there's real value in proving that you're a human, and we're going to have a variety of credential issuers that are going to enable that, and also social credentials within these DAO cooperatives, right? I think of them as cooperatives sometimes, because they're sort of very community driven. Ecosystem within Web3, where people like to just have a sense of community and collaborate on projects. So also social credentials I think are useful. I can say I work with you in a hackathon. I give you a credential showing that I work with you, right? So these non-financial credentials I think are also very relevant and will also empower users to have rich reputations and trust signals, as Sebastian was saying. These are going to be quite useful and interesting, and I think will enrich Web3, and obviously Web2 use cases as well when you start seeing kind of Web3 native ways of doing identity.
And Sebastian, from your perspective, what kind of use cases are you most excited about?
Well, I just not to repeat what Otto said, because I think in Web3, the use cases have been discussed many times, right? So starting from stopping bots, right, and proving that you're a human, then we can go one step up and prove that you are a unique person, that you are not controlling 10 accounts or 100. You are not a farm, right? One person through 100 accounts. And then on top of that, we have the compliance credentials with KYC, etc., right? So I think these are the most discussed use cases in the Web3 context. I think in terms of the use case that I think is going to affect most people inside or outside Web3 is going to be about reputation and content authenticity, right? I think regulations will play a big will be a big thing here, but it's moving slowly, right? As usual, regulation, digital identities provided by governments, all these things are going to come at some point, but this is very slow, right? I think there is going to be a need for content authenticity, and the digital supply chain will need a way to certify the information, and that will also lead to the creation of an online reputation, a permanent online reputation, because people very soon we won't be able to trust information, and they will need to trust sources, right? So sources will start capitalizing the reputation as value, and that is going to be a new asset for everyone, and that requires a very strong supply chain control in the digital world that can only be provided by the combination of verified credentials and decentralized identities, right? Because we don't want that our reputations also belong to these big platforms.
Yeah, and it's interesting, as soon as you attach, like even if we see it in our interactions online, when people don't think that there's a reputation for them at stake, the way that they behave is sometimes pretty deplorable. Like they'll say terrible things, or they'll, as a supplier, for example, in a supply chain use case, if they don't care about the reputation, they don't care about the service that they provide. But as soon as you put a reputation mechanism in there, it's amazing how that changes behavior. So yeah, that's a really good point as well. Moving back then into the integration itself and what brought Polygon ID and Dock together. What for you guys does the integration enable between Dock and Polygon ID? So basically, what will developers be able to do through Dock?
Yeah, so basically we're looking at right now the credential issuance capability through a SaaS platform. which is something that we hadn't done ourselves. And as Sebastian was saying, in the spirit of true decentralization, we need to have multiple providers offering this capability, right? We're working on an identity protocol, and we're at the end of the day a Web3 infrastructure company, right? So we're not a SaaS company. It's not our focus is not our specialty. So I think that's an important aspect there, and we've been sort of working with the tools for a number of months in hackathons and others, where the issuer node was just like a Docker image that you would download and you would have to set it up in your own cloud provider, your own infrastructure. That was creating a number of headaches for developers and just, wasn't, let's say, a very speedy or very easy to use experience. And so we needed a solution to solve this, right? We needed a way to, still give users the power of ZKPs, the power of decentralized identity, but in a very, easy to use way. So that is essentially what brought us to Dock. It's a provider that has experience with decentralized identity and SaaS, and I think was a great fit for us from that perspective.
And you touched on, Otto, in your explanation there a little bit about simplifying the kind of setup process. Can you go into that in a little bit more detail then? So maybe what were developers, or what are they doing today without with using your solution directly, and how is this being improved with Dock?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have an issuer node server that you have to install in your infrastructure. This is a Go server that you have to run on your side. You would rather either on your own, bare metal infrastructure or on a cloud provider such as AWS. The setup time for that at hackathons at best was 1 hour at best, and I would say that's with hand holding from our development team to make it easy to actually do it. Um, but even then, that's not a good enough experience. When you're in a hackathon, you're pressed for time, right? So compare that 1 hour setup time with less than 10 minutes on the Dock platform. That's a big difference, and it's very tangible, and it just facilitates things a lot, right? It gets developers in back their time to focus on what they're doing and the hackathon and just get it done, integrate decentralized identity, and then focus on the details later. That's the nice thing about the Dock platform as well, that flexibility, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well, like what we find is as well when we're working with companies is quite often it's not the business people at the company that finds new ways of working. It's often the technical teams, the product leads, the technical, the CTOs, and maybe some of the developers. And what they often do, of course, is if they're trying to figure out is this platform useful, they'll actually just start to try and quickly spin up some kind of brief demo apps themselves. And so not only in the context of hackathons is it useful, if someone's just actually trying to do a POC for themselves, the ability to spin up very quickly can often be quite powerful as well, because you avoid that frustration that can persist if something is tricky to get started with. So
I think absolutely, yes. I mean, it's important in hackathons. You need fast development. You need to be the ability to do quick prototyping. All of these things are important, and you just want to get your hands dirty, start experiencing the technology without having to have too much friction. So I think that's very important. Perhaps Nick, I don't know if it's worth kind of going into some of the details of what exactly this looks like for developers from the side of Dock. How would they go about going into Dock and start issuing credentials with Polygon ID?
yeah, it's a great question, and good to be asked a question on identity as well. I'm normally asking them, so it's really good to have that reversed. But the core of what we're offering here is really the REST API, as you guys know. So developers can go to just search.dock.io in terms of just setting up, and they can really go in there and they set up their own API keys if they're using the API and just start working. But the cool thing about this is Dock also has a no-code solution built in also. So even developers who just want to get an understanding of the process, or also non-developers, non-technical people can actually also use it and get set up. And actually I think there's a video coming out in maybe today or in the next couple of days where our head of engineering, Mike Parkhill, runs through that process from the no-code perspective. And I think it literally takes him just a few minutes to set up. But really, you're going to Dock and potentially using the no-code solution or the API, and you're really just setting up an issuer profile, which you can then set up a Polygon-based issuer profile, and then use that to create a schema, which is like the structure of the credential that you want to issue. And then it's just a case of filling that out and issuing that credential. And so it really makes it very powerful. And then you can just start publishing credentials after that. So you're getting the power of your network, but through the kind of easy setup on the SaaS side through Dock. So that's really what developers can do to go and start using the fruits of our collaboration. And as I mentioned, I think we're putting that video out today, so that'll give a better guide than I've given just now.
I gotta say that's really great. The part about no code, that's great. We have developers, they are UX designers in some case. They may not have the ability or the access to an API developer right there at the hackathon, and just have the ability to use a no code solution is great. Now I think that's part of why partnering with Dock was a great idea. Like a great solution for us. It's one thing to we could have gone with the issuer node to like Google or Amazon directly to like set this up and make this easy, but I don't think it's as powerful as what Dock has. Dock is a SaaS provider that not only is it a SaaS provider, it happens to be in the identity space. So it's already specialized in the decentralized identity space, and you're using a SaaS solution, right? So it's much different. You really get what decentralized identity and SSI is about from a SaaS perspective, I think.
Yeah, no, that's great. Really good to hear as well. Yeah, and I was glad that what I've been working on is kind of getting noticed as well, which is really nice to hear about. How has it been working together from your side, Sebastian? How's that been for you?
Yeah, super. As Otto says, since you are an identity specialist too, it's super easy, right? Sometimes you feel that you are in isolation because the topic of identity is quite complex, and we have our own language, and we have all gone through a journey where we made our mistakes, we learned our lessons, right? But then when you meet a partner that understands this world and understands the challenges in solving for something as complex as identity, right? And also understands the challenges of adoption, right? Of that, I think the identity is so pervasive in every application, is so transparent for the users that I think we are the most constrained world to introduce any friction, right? Anyone else can introduce user friction. Anyone else can demand the user to do jumps and hoops, etc. And we are always super limited in the amount of new things that we can ask from the users or the developers because they take identity for granted. It's part of the core base, of the core layer. So it's good for us to have an easier way to do things, right? It cannot be the only way for us because we are committed to the Web3 world, and some Web3 people may just decide that they want to have complete decentralization and manage everything by themselves. But it's very nice to have also a nice ways to start trying, right? Because adoption is key.
And I think that's really what we're doing here in a collaboration. It's really reducing some of the barriers to adoption that exist. Like in many cases, what we find is education is a barrier. So like trying to convince, or not even trying to convince, trying to educate companies or organizations about decentralized identifiers and verifiable credentials and why they should care about that thing and why it's good for their business. That's one barrier, but then actually getting them to use the technology we've created, and not only that, integrating it with their existing systems, because of course that can be a significant challenge, particularly for larger entities as well. So I think together, we're trying to reduce these barriers to adoption as much as we possibly can. And certainly from our side, I know that our engineers really enjoyed working with you, Otto and Sebastian, and some of the others in your team. And as we were saying before we got rolling today, if we can create such a big difference in such a small amount of time, just a handful of weeks, I think we can all be pretty excited about what the next kind of months and years can bring. So from our perspective, it's been a hugely enjoyable experience. Kind of moving into a slightly bigger picture and zooming back out, it'd be great to hear from both of you about where do you see, or how do you see decentralized identity developing over the next kind of say 0 to 10 years. What do you think that's going to look like? Sebastian, do you want to go first?
Okay. Yeah. So I think there are, well, first of all, it's almost impossible, right? To say, and in the industry where we are talking about next year is already a long time, right? But I can only talk about the trends that I'm seeing, and I would say I see two major forces, right? The first one are governments, because the challenge with decentralized identity is that you need to care for decentralized identities. It's super easy to just give away your privacy and your control for a bit of convenience. And let's be honest, most users, this is being proven, right? It's not an opinion, right? Most users will give away a lot for convenience. We will give away a lot for convenience, right? But at some point, the control over the identities and the reputation becomes an issue of national security, right? It becomes an issue of national sovereignty. And I think the big time for self-sovereign identity will come with governments realize that this is a strategic national asset, right? And we will enter forcefully in an era of more decentralized identities, right? Or at least not so corporate control identities. I think this will help a lot to the adoption, not only on the governmental sides, but also outside, because it will do the education that we so desperately need for the masses, right? So that is one of the trends. The other is maybe self-sovereign identity is not for people first. Maybe objects will have to have identities before people do, right? Because when we talk about this content authenticity and this new era of fakes, etc., cameras may have identities, right? Sensors may have identities. So I think there is a second line of play, or a second scenario, right? Where we will need to certify information across a multiple number of devices and people, not only just individuals, right? So I think these are two places or two trends that I think may influence the adoption of SSI.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, very, very interesting. Yeah, I think people think about identity always just with people, but as you say, Internet of Things and all the supply chain use cases that we hear about, identity is not just for people, it's for things also. Thank you for that. Otto, from your perspective, what do you think that the next kind of intervening years would look like, both from a kind of credential issuance perspective, but also for maybe holders like individuals and also verifiers? What do you think will happen in the next kind of few years?
Yeah, I mean, I think like Sebastian is saying, digital sovereignty, like it's going to be important, right? Me having more control over my data. Data portability is already a topic that, with GDPR and others, is becoming more and more evident that, individuals should be really in control of their data and be able to move it from one place to another. That's becoming more and more evident. Some of these platforms, some of these social networks, they may become protocols in themselves, right? Like we're already seeing that in Web3. There are reusable social networks that just lay the foundations for a social network, and then you can just build your own interface on top of it, right? So it's also shifting from just platforms that control all data to like, actual protocols that kind of enable that. And I think, verifiable credentials are going to be a huge part of that, right? So we're already seeing that in Web3. Things such as Lens protocol kind of enable that ability to do this reusable social graph that you can build, your equivalent Twitter or Pinterest or Instagram on top of, right? And all of that is going to be, needing verifiable credentials and identity to be useful and interesting. So I think that'll be very important as well. And the other thing is also, just allowing people to use identity digitally in day-to-day interactions, right? That's going to be more and more important with mobile driver's licenses and things of that nature. Reducing the time at traffic stops where you just tap the phone next to the policeman, and the policeman can see that you're in compliance with whatever he's looking for. Your car's registration is up to date, that kind of thing. That's going to be very important as well. So I think we're going to be seeing more and more of that in the coming years.
Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting space to develop. And sorry for the difficult question. We sometimes ask that, and I know it's a difficult question, because how can you possibly know what's going to happen in the next 10 years? But I think it's also really interesting to get your perspectives. So thank you very much for providing those. So then, just to conclude, I feel like we could speak all day. It's been a really, really interesting discussion. But obviously, kind of time waits for no man. And so, in terms of a kind of few last words, how would you conclude? What do you see as maybe the future of the collaboration between Dock and Polygon ID? Where do you see things going potentially?
Well, I think we have discussed the most short-term obvious use cases for the collaboration, which is basically making the onboarding easier to show credentials. And the scenarios for this is, well, when you are pressed for time in a hackathon, or when you are trying to do a proof of concept for a bigger project, right? Or maybe your business model is not around issuing credentials. That is some part of the process, but you want to have that done in an easy manner, right? And I think this third case can lead maybe the future opportunities, because we are very focused on Web3, right? But we know that there are opportunities for SSI outside of Web3, and there are a specific type of customers for this that we call the trust networks, right? Which is companies, organizations that somehow control the entire chain of verifying identity holders and issuers, right? We can think of NGOs, we can think of unions, we can think of all kind of scenarios where they are not, their business model is not around the credentials. The credentials is a utility, right? So they want to do that in the easiest way. And very often they don't have the technical capabilities to deploy their own infrastructure and to do their own things, right? So I think there could be some opportunities also on that side. And we are, as Otto said, we are a protocol, we are an infrastructure company. We want to step away from the user experience side of it, right? We want to allow for system integrators and partners like Dock to provide that last layer of customization and user experience.
And Otto, do you have any other kind of final words you wanted to share?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very excited to see what comes out in the hackathons in the next coming months, right? Obviously, ETHCC in Paris is going to be a first look at it. I can already see people, building, decentralized social networks using Dock, where I issue you a credential, that you work together with me in a hackathon, that kind of thing. But even beyond that, I think Dock has a great number of other tools that I'd be curious to kind of start experimenting with, including the Dock Wallet app, which I think is great, could be used for a number of use cases. And also like working together on setting identity protocol standards, right? I think there are a number of things at play right now that are important to collaborate on. What does data vaults look like, right? What does that storage layer look like? What does access to this data vault and consent layer look like? Working together and setting those standards with partners such as Dock will be highly relevant for us to work on together. So yeah, I think there's this is the beginning of a number of other collaborations to come.
Yeah, no, we certainly look forward to it. Well, I think that's all we have time for, but thank you very much, Sebastian and Otto, for coming on Identi3. Really enjoyed the chat, really enjoyed continuing to work with you, and we look forward to seeing you in Paris.
Thank you for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.